can have a, you want to sit up here? Yeah, this will give me like a child. Okay. Have a seat. Let's join in singing, stand and join in singing our opening hymn, Gather the Spirit. Let's say the covenant, which should appear on the screen. There it is. And as we do so, Jacob is going to light our chalice. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart. Please be seated. Good morning. My name is Roger Fritz, and I am your interim minister while the church is in a transition period between the settled minister of Peter's ministry of 16 years and someone who will come after him. And it's wonderful for me to be here and be part of this service. It's good to have all of you here today, and I'd like to extend a special welcome to any guests or visitors that we may have in the congregation. Sometimes when I go visit a church, just as without being a member or having to speak or anything, I just like to sit quietly in the sanctuary and not have any attention drawn to me. And that's okay. Other times, I think, I wish somebody would introduce me and say hi to me and ask me where I was from. And every time it's different how I feel about that. So if you are a visitor and you are in the mood of, hey, I'd like to be introduced, raise your hand and tell us where you're from. Not a whole speech about your entire life, but where you're from. Any visitors want to do that today? Anybody here? Yes, they're pointing at my son. He's like an introvert like myself. There's my son who is a visitor. Anyone else? All right. Well, if you are a visitor and you didn't want to raise your hand, that's fine. We welcome you and introverts as well as regular folks. It's good to have you with us. It's the first Sunday of religious education, and our religious education director, one of her family members came down with the virus, and so she's gone into quarantine and she's not here today. She's left me in charge, and I am fully responsible for everything that happens. We'll do the best we can. She's very good, and we depend on her for many things. If you're viewing this service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning if that's helpful for you. And if you'd like to talk with others after the service, there'll be a virtual coffee hour. Just stay logged in and you'll be invited into a breakout room. If you are attending worship in person, please join us outside for coffee hour after the service. Each Sunday, we gather in community carrying whatever emotions that we experience. We may be full of joy or sorrow, and we honor those feelings by dropping stones into this bowl of water. Just as the stones are held by the water, so are all who drop them held in love by this community. Please file up the aisle by the window and return down the center aisle. All are invited to join in this ritual. Those online can join us by entering joys and sorrows into the chat. I drop a final stone for the joys and sorrows held by those online and for those who were unable to be with us today. Now let's be together for a moment in prayer and meditation, first in words and then in song. As this day begins, may our bodies and our minds be at rest, relaxed, and open. May our feelings and desires be ready to respond to whatever opportunities the day may bring. May we put off the weariness of the past week and, thankful for the week's joys and fulfillment, turn our attention to the day that lies before us. May we begin this day conscious of the blessings and strengths that surround us, the people who trust and support us, the natural world of air, water, and earth that nourishes us. May we strive to live this day as well as it can be lived, giving to others the best in ourselves and in the process calling the best out of them. When evening comes again, may we be ready for rest and quiet talk, for fruitful silence and mutual enjoyment of wisdom, beauty, friendship, and love. When at last we are alone again, may we give thanks that another day has been given and lived as well as possible. Then may we give ourselves to sleep with a quiet mind. Amen. Let's join in singing Spirit of Life. At this time in our service, we ask for your financial support. You can text your donation to the number provided on the screen, $20 to 610-756-8883 for $20 donation. Thank you. Now we'll have our time for all ages on the screen. Let's see if this works.
Good morning. I am so sad to not be able to be with you on the first Sunday of RE. But unfortunately, my household has COVID and I'm not feeling great and I don't want to bring my germs to church. But I'm so excited that we have the capability to have me do Our Time for All Ages via video today. So I have a story for you. Henry sat in a little cabin, his little cabin, on a chair, listening to the sounds of the evening. Now, if you were there, you might have said that there was nothing to listen to. Certainly, there was no television or YouTube. Those wouldn't be around for another 100 years or more. There was no one to talk to. There were no airplanes overhead. There was no sound of a radio coming from next door. In fact, Henry's next door neighbor, Mr. Emerson, lived over a mile away. And Mr. Emerson didn't have a radio anyway. Even the natural world was still. No wind rippled the pond, and at that time of the evening, the birds had already gotten quiet as night approached. Still, Henry listened for the tiniest sounds. The sound that like a fish would make, just breaking the surface of the water and then splashing down. The sound that leaves make as they crackle when a mouse steps over them. The sound of the wings of a crow. To him, these little teeny sounds were music. Of course, most of the townspeople thought Henry David Thoreau was really silly when he decided to build a tiny cabin from used materials out by Walden Pond. Why would a promising writer want to move away from society, away from people, and sit in a place where there were only birds and bugs for company? In fact, Henry enjoyed the company of people. He enjoyed the company of his neighbor Emerson and other people who thought and talked about something called transcendentalism. But for him, for Henry, the quiet of the pond and the animals and the plants around it were really great company. Sometimes, Henry thought, the conversation that you learn the most from is the one in which the least is said. As Henry watched the light glistening on the pond, he thought about a story from the Bible about the prophet Elijah, who crawled off to a mountain cave to listen to what God wanted him to do. Now, Elijah stepped out of his cave and he heard the wind whipping through the mountains, a huge, big sound. It was sending boulders crashing down. But God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the whole mountain. But God wasn't in the earthquake. And then there was a fire sweeping across the rocks. Fire can make a lot of noise. Burning the brush outside the cave, roaring red and loud. But God wasn't in the fire either. Finally, after all of this roaring and crashing, everything became quiet. And Elijah stood there, shaking, wrapped in his cloak and just waiting. And out of the silence, he heard the still, small voice of God. Now, Henry wasn't sure that he believed in the God of the Bible, where that story came from, but he did believe that whatever God was, he thought that he would be able to hear God, to be inspired out in nature, out where he could hear the rustling leaves and the quiet sounds of the pond. Maybe he thought he could hear God in his heart, in a still, small voice. Thank you for listening to my story today. Good morning.
let's do the sending song.
Sending song, at which time, the first time through, teachers will exit, and the second time through, children will exit.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that having served for 9 years in a Unitarian Universalist church in Florida, which had about 580 retired persons, it is so wonderful to be in a church with so many children. It is just great. It is so wonderful to see all of these children, all the noise, all the activity. It's great. Reverend John Wolfe was a well-known Unitarian minister in the last century. He served in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a church of about 1,000 people for about 25 years. And in 1989, Reverend Wolfe preached a sermon in Tulsa with this one passage that I want to read. Reverend Wolfe said, "There is a lot of talk about spirituality these days. We talk about people becoming more or less spiritual." This is 1989. There's a great deal of interest in people learning how to become more spiritual in their lives. I must say, wrote Reverend Wolfe, I do not understand what people are talking about when they talk about spirituality. Spiritualism, I understand. The belief in extrasensory perception, reincarnation, people getting in touch with the spirit world, mediums, witches, potions, and prophecies. But I don't understand spirituality per se. Do they mean being more sensitive to things around you? Is it a greater awareness of the depth of things of life? Is it patience with things? A willingness to wait for the tough times to pass in the belief that a better day will dawn? Is it charitableness, kindness, sacrifice? If that is what they mean, all right. Those things I know about. Those things I can understand. But is that what people mean when they talk about being more spiritual? I don't know. Thank you. Well, to try to define either spirit or spirituality is not easy. People use these words in so many ways, some of which are diametrically opposed to others, that a common definition seems impossible. For some, the words have a specifically Christian meaning concerning God's power and presence on earth. The words conjure up visions of shining lights and halos. For others, the word spirit has a secular meaning having to do with physical and emotional energy. We have visions of a young child that has spirit, or a sick person having their spirits uplifted. For still others, the words spirit, spiritual, and spirituality have a magical meaning concerning the supernatural and with the power and the presence of ghosts. The word spirit in this context conjures up visions of seances and Ouija boards and Halloween. This was especially the case in America in the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. As a result, for many years, rational Unitarians avoided the word spiritual and the word spirituality. But still for others, today the word spirit has a specifically chemical meaning having to do with beverages containing alcohol. The word spirit in this context conjures up visions of whiskey, beer, and ale. A few years ago, I took a tour of an Irish whiskey distillery. The guide in the hour tour never used the word alcohol. Instead, she talked about the creation of spirits. She made it sound like we were in church. In the last 40 years, Unitarian Universalists in English-speaking countries around the world have been using the word spiritual. But what do we mean when we use that word? At a gathering of 20 Unitarian Universalists, I asked each person to write down their own definition of spirituality. Several common words and ideas appeared in the 20 definitions. 4 people used a form of the word connect. Another person used the phrase, "we are a part," to indicate the same idea as the word connect. Another person used the phrase "in relation" as a way of indicating connection. 3 people used the words depth or deep, inner or inwardly were also used by 3 persons. And center and core of being were used 3 times. So from all these comments, I created a composite definition, bringing together the common elements in these 20 definitions of spirituality. And you're not used to my sense of humor yet, so this is meant ironically. I created the definitive definition of Unitarian Universalist spirituality. Unitarian Universalist spirituality is entering the core of our being, the place within us beyond words, the place that is our center. There we find a connection to the whole of reality. We are in touch with ourselves, with others, with nature, and with God. We realize we are part of a wondrous whole. Spirituality is entering the core of our being, the place within us beyond words, the place that is our center. There we find a connection to the whole of reality. We are in touch with ourselves, with others, with nature, and with God. We realize we are part of a wondrous whole. Well, but how do we get this experience? How do we have such a spiritual experience? In my own life, this feeling of being part of a wondrous whole is certainly not with me all the time. The word spirit comes from a Latin word that means breath. I breathe in the spiritual. It fills my body and gives me new energy for living, just as a breath of clean, fresh air fills my lungs and gives me new energy. So just as with breathing, I never stop seeking spiritual nourishment. I'm always breathing in new air and expelling the old. My spiritual life is a continual cycle of death and renewal, of autumn and spring, of breathing in and breathing out and breathing in again. But how do I have such an experience? I fill my own spiritual needs in at least 8 ways. These are strictly personal and reflect my own experiences, tastes, and habits. The order in which I describe these 8 sources this morning has no special significance. The sources are not a series of steps. They are each equal in importance. And as I talk, I hope you will daydream and create your own list. When I think about my own life and reflect on where I go to get spiritual nourishment, the first word that comes to mind is nature. I've repeatedly felt an emotional thrill whenever I look at a beautiful tree or a cloud or the stars in the night sky or a mountain or a lake. And perhaps you've also had the experience of suddenly feeling a wave of peace and calmness flowing over you in the presence of the majestic beauty of the earth. It is that moment when we seem to see the trees, the sky, the water, as if for the first time. Suddenly we feel a voice speak within us. It says, "Yes, I am whole. I am a live person. Yes, good does exist in this world. Yes, hope exists. Yes, renewal is possible. Rebirth is possible." We feel an uplifting power in the presence of the natural world around us. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote about this in 1836. He published his essay, Nature, the essay that is the foundation of Unitarian transcendentalism. Emerson taught that we do not need the miracles of the Bible to know that God exists. All we need is to trust our own intuition, and nature will tell us that God is real. Transcendentalism is the belief that each of us can experience the existence of God through the beauty of nature. The recognition of spirituality in nature is a major contribution of Unitarians to world religion. So nature to me is a source of spiritual nourishment, but it's not the only source. As I reflect on where it is that I find the spiritual, a second source springs to mind almost immediately. I would call this source language. Both written words and speech can renew me spiritually. I find something incredibly nurturing about certain prose and poetry. Now, sometimes the words strike me immediately. I have a dream, shouted a preacher. When I hear a recording of these words, a wave of positive association comes over me. Sometimes the words give us spiritual meaning through repetition. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We've heard it hundreds of times, some of us thousands of times. For many people, the repetition of these simple words, generation after generation, gives the words a special spiritual power, a special quality of nourishment and renewal. Of course, through overuse and misuse, words can lose their power to touch me spiritually. Thomas Stearns Eliot wrote, "Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still." It is not easy to express spirituality in language. But still, there are moments for me when, through writing and reading, speaking and hearing, novels and essays, journals and letters, poems and preaching, the spiritual can and does come alive. Well, as I think about words as a source of spiritual nourishment, another source comes to mind and demands equal time. Music. Music, Bob, is my third source. A source as important as nature and language. We are born with the ability to appreciate music. Around the world, parents sing lullabies to their babies, and their babies respond by smiling and relaxing. Hush, little baby, mama's near, to brush your hair and calm your fears, to kiss your cheek and hold your hand, till you drift off to sleepy land. Didn't always work with my kids, but sometimes. It lasts all our lives. When my grandmother was 103, she could still sing the hymns from her church services. So music is central to my worship. When I sit in church on Sunday morning, I am calmed and I am soothed by the music. The sounds of the music flow through my ear, travel through the cells of the body, and they touch my soul. It renews me spiritually. So these are three sources: nature, language, and music. But thinking about both music and language causes my mind to wander in the opposite direction. The fourth source in which I find spiritual nourishment is solitude. I found repeatedly in my life that I need time alone, time to myself, to renew myself spiritually. Working as a minister and living with my family, which includes a partner and 3 young adults, it is sometimes difficult to get away and to be by myself. Somehow they always call. Still, I find it important to turn it off and have some solitude in my life. I think one reason people are willing to commute long distances to work is that this commuting provides them time to be alone. It gives them time to reflect on their lives and to center their being. I do not think that we should feel guilty about wanting to spend time alone, some time away from our families or our work. We need time to get away. We need to be able to weed our spiritual garden in solitude. Now, weeding reminds me of my fifth source of spiritual nourishment, something that is extremely important in my own life in renewing and sustaining me is work. When I work, when I contribute to the world in some important manner, whether it's washing dishes in a restaurant, sweeping a floor, picking apples in the fall, teaching children, selling shirts in the mall, or preaching sermons. All work I have done. When I have that experience, I feel renewed. I need work to be a healthy, happy human being. I feel a sense of satisfaction when I do my work well. Therefore, my fifth source of spiritual nourishment is work. Now, I've repeatedly seen that people who have satisfying work also have a sense of personal religious stability. We often look at these people and conclude that happiness stems from their financial security, and I don't wish in any way to downgrade the importance of financial security. It is very important. Nevertheless, I have often noted that people who have money but do not have meaningful work are not spiritually satisfied. Often the financial rewards of labor are secondary to the emotional and the intellectual rewards. Work gives us a sense of worth, a set of values and commitments, an accessible group of friends and colleagues, and a feeling of success and accomplishment. Work, I've come to believe, is an important source of spiritual nourishment. Immediately, when I think about work as a source of spiritual energy, yet another source comes to mind. That sixth source is play. Play. Whether it is boating or basketball, which I haven't been playing recently, bridge or tennis, skiing or hiking, play can be an enormously important source of spiritual nourishment. Religions often neglect play as a source of spirituality, focusing instead on activity that is more pious. However, I believe a special feeling of renewal comes from bike riding or swimming or playing cards with a friend. These activities can be religious. They can be spiritual. And we need not neglect them or feel guilty about them. Playing together, letting go of responsibilities and tasks is an important source of spiritual nourishment, a source as powerful as nature, language, music, solitude, or work. Closely related to play is my seventh source of spiritual nourishment. I believe that touching, physical contact, is a vital source of spiritual energy. And we've been missing that so much the last 2 years. Each time we are touched, each time we touch another person, we express something significant. If the touching is done with love and with caring, it can be comforting, warming, reassuring, healing. Research has found that a massage from a loved one can not only ease pain, but also soothe depression and strengthen a relationship. I have a friend who had a PhD in religious studies from Harvard and taught theology at one of our seminaries for his whole life. He published books and gave lectures on theology. He was a close friend of Paul Tillich. And I asked him what he did to renew his own spiritual energy. Because he was a theologian and intellectual, I assumed that he found his inspiration in the Bible or in the writings of the philosophers or in the works of the great poets. However, he answered in a simple and practical way. He said, to get me through the hard times, I go home and I hug my partner. Touching can be a spiritual experience of a high order. Nature, language, music, solitude, work, play, touching. These are, I believe, 7 sources of spiritual refreshment, all powerful, all important, and renewing our vital energy. But I would add one final source to complete Reverend Fritz's eightfold path to spiritual nourishment. The eighth and final source is laughter. To me, it seems impossible to survive in this world without a sense of humor. In the words of the great theologian, Charlie Chaplin, the theme of life is conflict and pain. Humor is the subtle discrepancy we discern in what appears to be normal behavior. Through humor, we see in what seems rational the irrational, in what seems important the unimportant. Humor heightens our sense of survival and preserves our sanity. We must laugh in the face of our helplessness or go insane. So what does the deeply spiritual Unitarian Universalist say when she orders a hot dog? Make me one with everything. Some might say that humor has little to do with spirituality. Some might say that churches should be serious, that ministers should be sober, and that laughter is out of place on Sunday morning. It's a terrible loss of perspective. For laughter takes us from fear to joy, from despair to hope, from doubt to faith. If you seek to feel uplifted, if you seek spiritual refreshment, look for the jokes in life. Look for the comedy and the follies of others. Look for the zany quirks of the universe. And look for the humor in your own foolishness and your own humanity. We create an immediate, intense community when we laugh together. I'm not afraid to call such laughter a spiritual experience. These then are my 8: nature, language, music, solitude, work, play, touching, and laughter. In a Unitarian Universalist church, we encourage each of you to develop your own ideas based on your own reason and experience. So I invite you to make your own list of what nourishes your spirit. This world has so many sources of stress, illness and loneliness, divorce and unemployment, accidents and misunderstandings. However, as we live in the midst of such stresses, these 8 sources can help us keep our faith in life. Smelling a flower, reading a poem, listening to music, meditating in solitude, feeling the satisfaction of work well done, playing a game with friends, hugging a person we love, hearing or telling a joke. These things nurture our soul, they renew our spirit, and make our lives worth living. Let's stand and join in singing our closing hymn. Let's say the benediction words together. And as you say them together, I will extinguish the chalice. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come seeking path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. This concludes our service.